All right, so this is the session 8 of the online training course. My name's Shani Winterstein. I manage the Save the Children Advocacy and Campaign online training course. Very happy to have with us Jessica Bryant from the Global Media Unit. And Jessica, I'll ask you to introduce yourself just before you start. Just to let everyone know that the course is available on OneNet. You can access it via PDFs, and you're required to go through the course and in your own time. The webinars are supplementary to the course, so we expect you to have already revised the session ahead of these webinars. The webinar will be approximately 40 minutes. 20 minutes will be given to Jessica to just give us an overview of the chapter, and then we'll spend the next 20 minutes doing questions and answers. I think we're more than happy for people to interrupt Jessica and ask questions as she goes through, and we really are looking to the participants to also provide insights from their work and examples from their work that can complement the overview that Jessica's providing. If you have any questions and you can't get hold of us, the microphone or through the IM, you can always email me at advocacytraining@savethechildren.org. So with no further ado, I'd like to hand over to Jessica.
Thanks, Shani. Hi, everyone. I'm Jess. I'm the Global Media Officer for the Global Media Unit in London. So I'll get started on this, and please do ask questions along the way. So the learning outcomes for this session are you'll be able to gain a better understanding of how and why Save the Children does global media outreach. You'll understand, how we as an organisation define the global media moment, key differences and synergies between advocacy and media work, and also some of the key factors to consider when you are developing your own national or regional media strategy for being a spokesperson. So you'll hopefully develop some practical ways to prepare for an interview as a Save the Children spokesperson. So I thought it might be helpful to do a brief introduction about the Global Media Unit and how we work. Set up nearly 2 years ago, and we work with members, country offices, regional offices to develop a stronger voice for Save the Children in members' media markets, in target advocacy countries, and in the international
You'll now be
media.
placed into conference. To mute your line, press *6.
We
To
produce
unmute, press
quality
#6.
global media products in multiple languages, including press materials, films, photos, B-roll, which we share across the movement with country offices, members, which you can then tailor for your use in your markets. And we also reach out to global media to attract public and decision makers' attention. The GMU is responsible for leading on global media planning, sign-off for these global media materials. We will lead on the media roster during humanitarian emergencies, and also support the development of the crisis communication framework. We have a site on the web page, and you can go to this and you can find documents to support your media work, and there's also lots of documents within the quality framework. Sorry, I just plug in my computer.
Hi, Jess. If you could just speak a little slower, the line is a little unclear.
Sure.
Thanks. So
I'll move on to the first section, which is Save the Children and Media Outreach. Is an essential part of us as an organisation being able to drive effective advocacy and campaigns. So our ability to advocate and mobilise can often depend on strong media and social media presence. So for us to be able to cut through that crowded media space, it's vital that we're able to create high impact news stories and supporting multimedia that's able to influence and drive the agenda forward on important child's rights issues. A highly visible campaign creates opportunities for our organisation to open the doors of power key stakeholders affecting children. We have spokespeople from across the movement that are available and that are integrated into this approach. So we're going to look a bit at media and advocacy and the synergies between the two and also the differences. So media work is just one tool in the advocacy toolkit, and it needs to be part of that mix of communication activities such as private advocacy and mass mobilization and public awareness raising. These activities may at times involve different modes and to varying degrees, and also the individual members, country offices and the GMU. But effective media outreach is able to move important policy issues up the policy agenda. And so, for example, a child's rights related issue that was not a priority for a decision maker before, a high profile media campaign is able to do this by bringing mass public attention to an issue that affects the lives of children. This should be evidence-based, and it is one of the range of tactics that can be a catalyst for decision makers to act. An important point for media and advocacy work is knowing how to identify and segment your audience. This is highlighted in one of the previous sessions, which is developing and communicating your message, but it is key that we understand your target media platform will differ according to the audience that you're trying to reach and their interests. So I'm going to talk a bit now about media messaging and the importance of how we need to ensure that our media messages, when we go out to the media, are coherent and also sustainable. These messages need to be consistent so that everybody is reinforcing one version of the message, and in order that we are able to build that memory and ensure we have a shared understanding and objective. Media messages also need a focus. So, for example, we do not always need to necessarily respond reactively to all issues that affect children, but we need to take a collaborative and proactive approach around a few that we as an organisation and identify as priorities. But then again, communication is also complicated by the fact that we must face north, south, east, west, and this means that messages delivered to one audience can often be received in a totally different and even a sometimes hostile way. And you will see, particularly in a big campaign or a complex humanitarian emergency, the difficulties that a globalized organisation like Save the Children can have trying to communicate on a global scale. So the next part of this session looks at what is news, and really it's got to be something new. Broadcast news is what is happening right now, and that is one of its greatest strengths, its speed and its immediacy. It's new because it's something that hasn't been reported before. It's a fresh piece of information, or it can also be the latest development in a rolling or ongoing story. So within Save the Children, we define a global media moment as when the organisation, speaking as one, has something new and significant to say about what may or will affect children, women and vulnerable communities, and that we can anticipate will cut through that crowded global news media space in order to provide high impact visibility for the Save the Children brand. There are often 5 factors that editors consider when they're deciding if a story is newsworthy, and the majority of stories need to perform well in at least 2 of these areas. So as I said, it could be something new. It could be a new statistic, a new piece of research, a new survey or a new point of view. And then also the proximity. So stories which happen near to us have more relevance. It's really important that you use your knowledge of local issues and culture to make sure that your story is relevant in the market that you are pitching to. It's also important that these stories have significance. So the number of people affected by a story is important. And I think a really great example of this was State of the World's Mothers 2013, 1 million figure top line. It was our biggest global news story yet. And that's because it was an easily digestible figure, which clearly affected a large number of people. And other examples of this can be, the huge humanitarian emergencies, such as the Asian tsunami of 2004 and Typhoon Haiyan that happened a lot more recently. So fourthly, prominence, and this is very relevant for campaigning. Famous people get more coverage just because they are known by many people. And this is often why a lot of campaigners try to have a well-known person or celebrity to take up their campaign cause. And the last factor is human interest. Journalists need to put a face to the facts and figures that we're presenting, as it makes people identify with the situation. People often a lot more motivated by a story of a single child than hearing overwhelming statistics about millions of children. And this is what brings the audience much closer emotionally to the story. So then we come to an activity, and it's a really simple activity just to check your understanding of what is news. And we just ask you to summarise what is news in one sentence, and then identify 2 of the factors an editor considers when deciding whether a story is newsworthy, and explain why you think that they matter. So coming to the end of the first sort of section of this session, does anybody have any questions? Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I'll carry on.
Yeah, good.
Okay, great. So section 2, identifying the top line for a press release. So a lot of people ask, what is a top line? The top line is the foundation of which we build our story. You need to think of it as the heartbeat of the story. This is not necessarily the headline, but it is that first line of the release which will hook that reader. And if we don't get this right, then it's more than likely that we have lost that reader. And a correct top line would ensure that your story is new, it's direct and informative, and it also needs to be clear and easy to understand. So how do we get that top line? There's a number of questions that you need to ask yourself. Why is this interesting and important? Ask key questions about the story until you are able to understand it. The who, what, why, when, how. What is new about this story and what did you not know before? So decide which of these answers your audience needs to know first. And usually the best way to describe this is what is happening now. It's also important to avoid complicating the story. So think about the key messages. What is the key message? What's the story? Why should I care? And what can be done about it? Now, typically you don't want to have more than 3 key messages, and you want to ensure that you retain only the strongest examples and facts and figures to illustrate these messages. Another important thing to remember is that we shouldn't be using jargon when we're speaking to the media and the public. These jargon words they can often distort what the message is and what we are doing and trying to get across. So it's important just to say what it is in normal everyday language. An example of this would be where we say words like capacity building, we should just use words like training and educating. Or non-food items, we would rather use something like other essentials such as, or stakeholders, we would say something more like governments and communities.
Joseph, so then, can I ask you how you would suggest people test those messages to see if they're responding to the audience?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could always think about, how would you describe this to your mum or your friend or somebody who doesn't work in the sector to see if they understand and they're engaging.
Can I offer another suggestion, actually? Generally speaking, particularly North American newspapers, but I would imagine this is similar beyond, have a grade level that they write to. And so you should find out what the grade level is that most newspapers write to. In North America, it used to be grade 12. Now it's closer to grade 10. And so if a message can be can mesh with that grade level, how it's phrased and what it's phrased, then it's more likely to also be picked up by the journalists themselves, who are conscious of the grade level that they're writing to.
Great, that's really helpful. Has anybody else on the call got any other suggestions?
Saisley, can you send us more information about how to assess the grade level? Saisley from Save the Children.
Sure, I will find that and send it to you.
Thank you very much.
My team as well, if they've got any further information on that. Thank you, Saisley. So then the activity for this section, we provide you with the executive summary of one of our past reports, Superfood for Babies. And we are hoping that you can imagine this is a new report coming out and that we want you to get this story reported in the mainstream media. So in no more than 20 words, we ask you to identify and write that news top line as if you were targeting either a global media outlet such as New York Times, or think about how it would work in your national or regional media market to tailor and tweak that top line and headline for this report. So the third section of this session looks at media and then looking at the synergies and the difference between global and national media outreach. So the key difference between international and national or local media markets has to do with the levels of proximity to an audience. Everything we do needs to be audience driven and thinking about who are our target publics. So there will at times be crossover with local stories spilling out over into international markets, but also more commonly this is vice versa with global stories going into national and regional markets. And for national or local media, the message will be more relevant to a particular market than for global use. I think the Race for Survival was a really great example of a campaign activity that can be used to really gain national media attention and whereby country offices can tailor their messaging to suit target audiences and in line with the advocacy priorities of that country. And although the Global Media Unit leads on global media outreach, country offices will always take these materials and adapt global products to suit their own markets and target publics. So when country offices are developing their national and local media strategies, they're responsible to do this in coordination with their regional office where this is relevant. And aside from helping to build the reputation, brand and voice of Save the Children in country, country office media strategies will reflect national advocacy priorities and other agreed global organisational strategies and policies as well. And country offices are very much encouraged to reach out to news correspondents that are based in their national contexts and build these trusted relationships with them. And this does include global media correspondents based in country. And when this is the case, it's good to do so in coordination with the GMU or the relevant member that oversees that relationship with that news outlet. The GMU can also provide guidance on developing national media strategies, and there are a number of documents on the OneNet to support this, and depending on capacity, we will support and feedback on such strategies. I know there have been quite a few questions recently from country office staff to get support on this, and we're working on template documents and we'll share those with you. So we do have sort of 5 simple steps to follow when developing your national media strategy. And the key thing is to identify the problems or the key issues and priorities, and why, and think about why and what we need to do to communicate via media platforms. So think about defining your overall objectives and how to address a problem or reach this objective through your media work. And again, identifying your key audiences, the people or the groups that you want to target, and think about which media platforms are most suited to reach this key audience. You might want to think about distinguish between direct target audiences, for example, political decision makers, or indirect target audiences, those who can help you reach your goal through those with the power to influence decision makers, or those that you will want to mobilize for your campaigns. You then need to identify the stories or the issues that you want to speak about, and then identify the country office's key media moments for the year. The obvious ones are the big GMU-led big global campaign moments such as State of the World's Mothers, which is a great example where nearly all country offices can tweak the media materials to resonate in their markets. But then there's other national opportunities, such as elections, where you can build that momentum and communications around child rights issues to put on the agenda of political parties and their manifestos in country. But it is important to be realistic about what you want to achieve. And then you need to develop your plan of action. What are you going to do, when and how? Another important element of media is to regularly monitor the media landscape to ensure that the platforms you choose are as strategic as possible. And it's also important, remember, to monitor and evaluate your media activities, as this will establish the baselines to measure media activities year on year. And with developing your national media strategy, national media moments are rarely global media moments, but you can remember that they may have resonance in other regions or country offices or countries with a large expat community. So, for example, Papua New Guinea was last on the Everyone campaign report. This may not have significance or relevance in the global media space, but it could have interest in the Australian market. So it's for national staff to try and capitalise on these synergies and liaise with country and regional offices or members where relevant. Has anyone got any questions on that?
Jessica, can you perhaps give a little bit of overview of how this would be different in a humanitarian setting, if at all?
So reaching out to the media in country. Yeah. I mean, the basics are the same. I mean, we have our sort of global sign-off procedures, but I can see, Gaza is a really good example of the different ways in which we've tried to bring our messaging out, and we liaise with the country office, the regional office, and then we have that global policy sign-off that sits with the US, and then we have the global media sign-off. But we'll have our overall messaging, but you will know how your national or your local media takes up on a different story. So Syria resonates really well in Australia and Germany, and certain countries will pick up on South Sudan, and some stories just won't get picked up at all. It really does depend. And China and Xinhua is a big Asia newswire. They're often interested in a lot of the stories that come out of Africa, like Central African Republic and South Sudan. So we'll pitch those stories to those outlets, whereas in other places they're not interested. So we liaise a lot with the francophone media as well, and pitch those stories. And we try, in the global media, we try to build up relationships with the Middle East correspondents at Al Jazeera. And I think it's very much building up those relationships with the key media outlets and following journalists to see which stories they are covering at the time. Does that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think it's just the balance of internal media and international media, which sometimes can be a challenge because many of our country offices have good relationships with local media. But when international media comes in, it's a little more difficult to then figure out where their space is.
Sure, that makes, yeah. And when GMU travel, we try to support the country offices as much as we can to fix those meetings with key journalists who are in country, with BBC and Al Jazeera and Reuters and AP, to start to build those relationships and understand who is covering the story. And I think a lot of staff in country don't always know how to approach the global media, but that's where I think the GMU is really able to support with that.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions for Jessica on this?
Well, Jess, I think it would be, and maybe I missed it, and if I did, I'm sorry because I was running a little bit late, but did you have a chance to kind of stress how, what that building relationship with journalists is really like, and what the core essence of it is in terms of, that they very much are independent actors, and we shouldn't see them as allies. We should see ourselves as resources to them if we want them to cover our stories. Did you go into that piece of the relationship?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really, really important point, and I think that's covered in the session about doing media trips and acting as a spokesperson, and the way that we provide them with the materials such as press releases and particularly multimedia materials. In this day and age, budgets are being cut, and we have that source of information. We have the access to the people that we work with, and we are able to offer up those human interest stories to the media. And we're constantly sharing our materials with Reuters and newswires, and they're really grateful because they can share those materials really far and wide. And it's key to build up. We go back to the same journalists with our stories, and we build up those trusted relationships, and we often take them on trips. And I think country office staff who are able to coordinate those trips with journalists key. We've had some really successful trips in South Sudan recently, which then led to fundraising. And I think people don't always see that connection between media and fundraising and campaigning, and it's good to share those success stories.
Yeah, hi, this is Irvin here, and just to pick up on the points that are being made, and I think it is an important point you raise it, Cicely. I think we have to be realistic that it's a marriage of convenience. It is not a marriage of love that we have with journalists. We need journalists because obviously we want to get our messages across. We want to get brand profile and all that, as well. I think we'd all agree. Journalists need us because they're basically looking for stories. They're looking for credible sources of new information, fresh information, and so on. That's as far as it goes. And over time, we would hope, of course, to develop a degree of trust with certain journalists who they feel that they can come to us knowing that we are going to give them credible information and that the data is reliable and so on and so on. At the same time, we also have to make sure that when we're talking to journalists that we are actually offering them something that is genuinely newsworthy, because there's nothing worse if you're sitting in a newsroom putting out whatever kind of news output. If somebody rings you, takes your precious time with something that's never going to make it as a story. And actually, it's counterproductive for us to offer up information that actually isn't newsworthy. So, back to our marriage of convenience. That's where it is. There is no love.
Yeah. The only thing I would add, Mervyn, just from, and I don't know if this is an experience that others have, but I know that it was something that was echoed by colleagues in Australia. I know that in North America and perhaps in Australia as well, there's a real suspicion on the part. Journalists are a cynical bunch in these countries anyway, if not globally, and so there's a real not, I wouldn't go so far as to say standoffishness, but they jealously guard their independence to the point where they really they don't want to be seen as extensions of someone's PR campaign. And so it's important to, in the context of at least these countries, and perhaps this resonates with others on the phone, to be very conscious of that piece of the relationship, that in fact, not only should you do it as a means of risk assessment and caution in terms of the media, but it's also important because if you cross that line, or if you come across as if you think they're just PR hacks, it will be counterproductive as well. That was also a point that I was trying to get to.
Yeah,
but it may not be prominent elsewhere, but it's very prominent in the North American context.
Yeah, and I think it's prominent certainly across the Anglo-Saxon world, and it goes further than that as well. I agree completely. And to supplement what you're saying, as part of the scrutiny, and rightfully, it's there, the scrutiny. In the last few years, particularly of the INGO sector, there has been a certain wariness of information and data that we hand over. We have to make sure that, of course, what we're handing over again is genuinely new and significant. In different places, they feel they've been burned a little by us, perhaps. Possibly, I'm not saying Save the Children, but certain other organisations having slightly over-egged what the story may be. So we just need to be mindful of that. It's not a big deal, but we just build into that professionalism which we have to use when we're managing this relationship.
Great, thanks, guys. Just another question that I've received from many staff over the years has been related to how we prepare spokespersons for the media in a country office. Who is the spokesperson, and how do we train those people to engage with the media? Perhaps not managing the relationship per se, but being the person that gets quoted. And what guidance do you have to prepare spokesmen, and also any policies that we may have as to who is actually the best person to speak to the media, and if there are restrictions on what staff can engage with the media?
Yeah, well, that's the next part of the last bit of this session. But Mervyn, if you want to say anything before we go into that bit.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, Jess is about, as she just said, to go through some of the rudimentary parts of rules of engagement when doing interviews with media organisations. At the basic level, we expect, at the very least, that country offices have identified who their spokesperson or persons are. Now, as part of the support we can give, there's training that we do as and when we can, and we've already started doing that in lots of different places, training up spokespeople in different country offices. I don't want to steal Jess's thunder, because there's a whole set of checklists and what I call rules of engagement when we engage in media broadcasting. So perhaps we just go through some of that checklist now, and then if you've got any further questions, let's pick them up.
Sure, thanks, Mervyn. So as we were saying, really important that broadcast and webcast media platforms, they require audio and video materials, which includes interviews with these experts and witnesses to stories. Audiences always want to hear, from those experts who are on specific issues and that have seen what has happened during a major event at that time. And this is always a great opportunity for Save the Children to be the voice of a credible organisation. And as we were saying, it's important to remember those rules of engagement before conducting an interview with a journalist, as this is an important part of ensuring that you have a successful interview. So some of the top tips on preparing for a broadcast news interview. would be when that request comes in from the media outlet, the first questions you would ask would be, is it a live or is it pre-rec interview? Where will the interview be, and what will the duration of that interview be? And then you need to ask, how long will the final report or news item be, and how long's your final interview clip? And then you need to ask, why are you doing this interview? What is the aim? What direction do you want the interview to take? And as we discussed earlier, what is your top line, one key message that you want to get across in that interview, and how are you going to make that point? You need to do a bit of if you have time. Some interviews, they want them very quickly, but if you have the time, do a bit of research on what have your colleagues said on this subject before. Journalists do like to remind you of something that your organisation had promised maybe 3 months ago. So make sure that you have the facts and the figures to back up your messaging. Be aware again of your audience. Who are your audience, and what is their current level of knowledge, and what do you want them to know from this interview? And also be aware of the journalist. If you're able to check on social media, on Twitter, most journalists these days will be on Twitter, and find out what they've been covering about this story, and as they are likely to have a different perspective to the story from you. So with the soundbite of the interview, it may well be different from your messaging. It could be very, very short. It could be summed up in 15 to 20 seconds. That's a maximum of 60 words. So for your message to get through, it does need to be simple and short. And your media manager or your comms staff in country is able to support you with practicing your key messaging, and should be able to prep you before the interview. And during the interview, don't be afraid to repeat your key message and use different forms of words. But it's important, like we said earlier, not to use jargon words. You can always do research about the programme or the publication or the website, and what the angle the journalist is taking. It might not be a good idea to ask exactly what the questions during the interview will be, but you can get a steer from the person organising the interview or the journalist what the direction and possibly even what the first question will be, so that this could put you at ease and establish a trust between you and the interviewer, particularly if this is going to be a live interview. And it's just important to remember that you are the expert, and that is why we are putting you forward for this interview. I mean, that's just quite a short summary of how to prepare for an interview. There's a lot more detail within the fuller session of the module. But then we have an activity at the end of this session which gets you to start thinking about how you would prepare for an interview, how you would get your key messages across. And we ask you to choose a relevant topic, and we give you a interview preparation grid, and ask you to write 2 examples within that format. So there's a lot more guidance within the module, and again there's a lot more guidance within the quality framework on the OneNet as well. Mervyn, did you want to add anything on spokespersoning?
Okay, thanks so much, Jace. I think Mervyn left the call.
Hi, no, sorry, I just unmuted. My apologies. Look, I think that was very helpful, Jess, and I think that in the mix here, when country officers are identifying their spokespersons, in all the points that Jess has made, naturally we use common sense. We need to make sure we've got people who are very confident, fluent, as Jess has said, not going to use jargon, can explain our work in a way that makes it easily accessible. And we could then, there are a range of tactics that can be used to engage audiences in terms of humanizing whatever the issues that we're trying to put across, setting out the problem, informing of a solution, and putting out the call to action. But as Jess said at the beginning, one of the crucial things is to make sure we're clear about what the format is, if it's live or pre-recorded, if you're doing broadcast, that is, of course. Because once you know roughly the duration, and news organizations will give you that, will give you a ballpark figure, it can then frame how you're going to couch your message, how many messages you're going to put across, 1 or maybe max 3, and so on and so on. But I think the checklist that Jess has just put out is a good start. Thank you, Jess.
Hi, Jess. Can I have a question? Could I make a question?
Go ahead.
This is not actually related to Spokesperson per se, but I had a chance. There was a story where I called media to come by, and though I had previously talked to them and I gave them lots of information, what I thought, so the way the story was actually cut off and placed in the media gave completely the wrong message, which actually put both Save the Children and our partners in a sort of in a black light. In cases like that, what do you do? So do you call them? I mean, I called them back and I sort of explained to them what should have been done, or that this actually came out the wrong way. But what are some of your suggestions? I mean, what do you do so something like this actually doesn't happen in the future? So you make sure that what actually you're providing them, that's what's actually coming out, instead of them twisting the story so it looks good in front of their media, but puts us and the teachers at that time and partners in sort of a bad position.
Yeah, hi, this is Mervyn here. I'll pick up. For looking ahead, the key things here are those conversations with whichever news or media organisation you're dealing with, to find out A, what their angle is on an issue, on the story. B, of course, what it is that they want to explore with you. And as Jess has already said, we can't expect any credible news organisation to give us questions, and would never expect that. But it's very legitimate to ask what are the question areas, to make sure that we're engaging on stuff that obviously is our area, and that we're not being asked to stray into areas that would potentially compromise us. Mm-hmm. And so in the future, I think you'll find that just going through some basic steps such as that will. And the other thing, before I forget, actually, is to check who else will be contributing to the story. Because by inquiring, and these are legitimate questions, and any decent news organisation will be able to lay out answers for all those areas. By doing that, you're making sure that we're able to contribute in a way that's worthwhile for us at the same time. Because you're absolutely right. What we don't want to do is give an interview where they end up using whatever is the 20 seconds, which isn't perhaps how shall I put it, a fair representation of what you were saying. And thereby, as you've just explained to us, potentially compromises us in some of our programmatic work. It's through those exploratory questions during the setting up process that's going to flush all that out, and then obviously inform us as to whether we actually proceed with conducting the interview or not.
All right. Thank you, Marvin. That's very helpful. And actually, interview settings, that's particularly what I've done, but this was a news story that was covered with just minor interviews taken, but it was the news story that took the opposite of what actually was supposed to be placed out in the media. So thank you.
Does anybody else have questions or examples of your experience of working with media that you'd like to share? Please speak up, or you can type in the bottom section if you're unable to use the microphone. Jess, I've got a question on baselines of media reporting. You spoke in the presentation about you looking at how the media reports as a baseline. Can you just speak a little bit about that and let us know if there are any tools out there, specific ways that people can do that baseline?
Sure, absolutely. So I'll say what we use in the GMU. So we use a service called Meltwater, which SCI also have access to, and I think a few key media colleagues across the organisation. So it's an online media monitoring platform, and you can type in this key search words and run reports, and we do get updates as well. But I know in some country offices it's a lot more difficult to get media monitoring, but whenever you do a broadcast interview, just keep note of it, the outlet, and share that with the GMU. There are other ways, to monitor the media. There's lots of different tools to do that. You can when a big media moment is going on, you can also use Google to monitor the media. And the GMU produce monthly reports, which I hope you all get to see. And this breaks down country by country all the media hits that we've had for that particular month across all the main global media moments that are happening. And it is key that country offices and members do share their media monitoring with us at the GMU, as we can't capture everything. But it's really interesting to see. Particularly State of Wales Mothers, I think, is a key one. Last year we had the most number of hits in over 100 countries that we've ever seen. And it was incredible to see the small countries picking up this story, and I think that's a key story that can be picked up in a number of different markets. But media monitoring, it's a really good way to establish those baselines. And if country offices do have questions about how they can better monitor their media, please do get in touch, and we can discuss ways of potentially using the services that we have, or look into what services you could use in country.
Great, thanks, Jessica. I know that some countries have used the media monitoring also to see how the message has changed in a country. This was often used with the HIV response, whereby they were able to monitor when the media reported on HIV, if it was negative and incorrect data and facts were included in there, but also the amount of times they made reference to children. And then after a year or two, able to then look at the media and see whether people had become more informed. Journalists were speaking more about children's issues within there. And it's a really good way of being able to see how the conversation has changed in a country. So when you're developing your advocacy strategy and you're looking at things like public perception, the media tracking is an incredibly valuable tool to do that. Any other questions from the group or examples that you'd like to share? One last question for you, Jessica. It's about balancing human interest stories. We're always told that we need a human interest story in an article, and sometimes when we've got very data-heavy information, it's a little difficult to figure out where do we start a human interest story and where do we start with the heavy data information, and any tips that you may have for somebody drafting a press release or somebody speaking to a journalist about how we can make sure that human interest stories are both compelling but also are able to link to the bigger message that we're trying to share.
Yeah, hi, it's Mervyn. I'll pick up here. It depends on what data you've got, but assuming you've got some truly top-line generating data, evidence that's primary research and it's ours, the data, as long as it's served up as, again, in a way that's user-friendly for lay audiences, is very much where the top line comes from. We bring in human interest stories as, if you like, supporting stories. There are ways in which we, as we always say, humanize the data to convert it from something that may be rather dry and feeling perhaps for some target publics remote, to make it come alive. But I have to repeat that if we've got some really strong evidence and top line data, the story is very much around that data primarily, and then you have those sidebar stories that humanize, that bring alive what we're talking about.
Great, I think that's incredibly helpful. All right, I'm going to do one last round of requests for questions.
Yeah, can I have just one last question?
Go ahead, Monica.
Just recently, actually, we've had a lot of requests from the media in Kosovo. There's been a lot of cases where a lot of children in Kosovo have been sort of abducted by either their fathers or parents and families moving to Syria and to join the ISIS. And because this has been such a sensitive issue, I personally was not sure whether to respond or not. How do we respond to it? So I had actually asked for help from the regional office. But I have not received an answer back yet on this one. So how do we know, I mean, which sort of stories, I mean, how far can we go? Which stories do we pick up? Where do we leave? I don't know if I'm asking the question correctly.
Yeah. Hi, this is Mervyn again. We'll look several considerations here, I think, initially. First of all, you're in a position on the ground there to make the call on whatever you think is the sensitivity around the story for you. It's difficult to say that from sitting outside Kosovo. But the next consideration is using the model of image, action, impact. So, the image, the issue, what is it that is the violation here? And you mentioned a moment ago about the abduction of children. So clearly, that seems to be the important thing we need to speak out about. And my understanding of Save the Children is very much that, you know, silence is hopefully not the option, and that we should be considering saying something, being the voice. But the next thing to consider, which is important, if it's not immediate that we're addressing this, then hopefully in the near future, but that is then, what is the Save the Children action? What are we doing about it? And therefore, what is our programmatic response? So that's very important too, because within a short space of time, dealing with any media organisation, they're legitimately going to press us when we raise an issue to say, and you know, what are you doing about it? You'll Save the Children. So we need to make sure we're ready there. And the third bit is the impact. And so more broadly, what does our intervention mean in the longer term, we hope? So coming back to your issue in Kosovo, I mean, I as part of the assessment that you do, I would hope that, you know, part of your consideration is what are we doing about it on the ground? Because especially if we are doing something about it, I'd hope that we're, you know, looking to work out ways in which to speak out about what sounds on the surface, you know, to be obviously something extremely serious.
Mm-hmm. Thanks so much. That's very, very helpful.
Great. Thanks so much for the conversation, guys. I think this is very helpful for staff that are on the webinar, but also staff that will be watching this webinar recorded that will be available on OneNet. Jessica, Mervyn, any last comments before I close up this webinar session, or last thoughts that you'd like to share?
No, I think that's fine for now. Thank you.
And if there's any outstanding questions or questions on human interest stories or media monitoring, anything like that, just get in touch with us directly, and we're always happy to talk.
Great. Thank you so much. Just to also let people know, in the next few months, we will be, Save the Children is working on a communications, advocacy and media training for humanitarian settings. And if you're interested in that, please do get in touch with us, and we'll forward you to the relevant person at Save UK that is coordinating. Thank you, everybody, for your time. Thank you to the presenters for your information and insight and examples. Please do get in touch if you have any questions. Advocacy training at savethechildren.org. And have a lovely afternoon, evening, and day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.